Hey, everybody, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for Conversations in Genre. My name is Kelly Jo Brick. I'm the vice chair of the WGA Genre Committee, where we champion all things genre, from sci-fi to horror, rom-coms, action thrillers, you name it. We'd love to have you come join us, join our committee. Our next meeting is coming up next week, Tuesday at 6:30. It's via Zoom, so you can pop in pretty easy. You can find out more and get a link on the guild calendar. Before we get going, I want to give a big thanks to Greg, our guild liaison, who does so much behind the scenes, works so hard to make events like this happen. He's amazing. Also, a big thanks to Janine and Shawn, our panelists today. We really appreciate you being here and sharing your time and experience with us. With that, I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight, Genre Committee Chairman, Dwayne Johnson-Cochran. Dwayne, it's all yours.
Thank you, Kelly Jo, and welcome everyone for being here today for the Conversations in Genre. This is our series where we have showrunners, writers, film writers, TV writers who want to talk to each other about what they do. And my two guests today are Janine Sherman Barrois, and thank you, and Shawn Ryan. Both are illustrious writers, have done many, many amazing shows on television, showrunners as creators, and we are proud that they are here to talk to each other about what they do in our Conversations in Genre series. Janine and Shawn, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. We're excited.
Thanks so much. Thank you. This conversations is really a conversation between you two. I will sort of lead you around and with some ideas and some topics, but more than anything else, I like to find out how you two kind of start your career. What was that moment? And maybe Shawn, you could talk first, and then maybe ask Janine about it. When you knew this was going to be the career you're going to be in.
Sure. I was not one of those kids that grew up wanting to be a writer. In fact, when I entered college, I had never written a creative thing in my life. But I ended up in a theater class where I had to write a 5-minute scene, and got a lot of encouragement from the professor after writing that scene. And he encouraged me to take a playwriting class, and I wrote my first play there. And by the time I graduated, I had written 3 plays that had been produced at the school. One of them won American College Theater Festival awards for best play in New England and best comedy play in the country. And I was like, this is what I want to do. This is what I should do. So it was a lot of years of paying my dues in Los Angeles. And I think I wrote 16 spec scripts before I got hired on staff of a show. But I never wavered. I just knew that I couldn't be happy as a person if I didn't at least try to do it. And fortunately, I found some success before I gave up. So that was me. What about you, Janine? Were you one of those? I was 4 when I knew I wanted to be a writer.
No, I sort of like telling stories at dinner and like at Christmas. And then I went to college, and my roommate's father was a director, and he kind of described to me what television writers did. And he said, if you want to be poor, move to LA, because it's better to be poor with the sun than going to New York.
True.
Yeah. So I thought I wanted to just write like movies. And then I came out here and I worked for different, I worked for a few writers. I worked for, Judd Apatow. I worked for Ralph Farquhar. And I saw what they did. And I thought like, oh, writers' rooms, you actually write a story that makes it on the air. It doesn't just sit in your closet, which sometimes it feels like with features, it takes so long to get done that there's actually a path to tell stories weekly. So I don't think I knew from an early age, but I think I was encouraged by parents to go on a creative path. Were your parents supportive of your journey?
Yeah, I came from a pretty funnily matched couple. My father was a Republican voting CPA accountant who loved to battle the IRS on behalf of the company he worked for. And my mother was a liberal public school teacher who brought me out onto the picket lines when she and the teachers were on strike when I was like 6 years old. And most of the year she taught elementary school, but there was a section of time during my middle school and high school days where she actually worked at a magnet school for the arts and taught drama. And she, we lived about an hour and a half, 2 hours outside of Chicago, but once or twice a year, she would make sure to take my brother and me into Chicago to see plays and everything. And so I would say that my father was a little dubious, but when I won this playwriting award, that was a certain amount of validation. The most important thing about that award had less to do with me and more to do with it made my father feel like, well, maybe he's got some sort of future in this.
Yeah.
And so I won't give him too hard a time about it.
Yeah, that's like a similar thing. My dad literally said, he gave me his Taurus, which was a really whack car to bring to LA. He said, drive across country with your best friend and go after your dreams. Like people fought for you to go and do whatever you wanted to do. So go do it. Yeah.
I find that a lot of writers I work with have one of two stories. One, supportive parents like that empower you to pursue your dreams. And then the others that give almost nothing and people kind of achieve in spite of their parents almost.
Exactly.
But I was always quick to credit my parents. They really set me up for success. They stressed my school teacher mother really stressed education.
Yes.
And I have a ton of people I've worked with on my shows who have at least one parent who was a teacher.
My mom was a teacher as well. Crazy.
I have no idea. There you
Oh,
go.
yours too? Oh, see, wild.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you get a bunch of writers in a room and you ask them like what their parents did, I really feel that it over indexes towards people who work in education.
Now,
Mhm.
I have a question for you. You talked about you came out wanting to be a film writer. Now I'm pretty certain I'm older than you. But when I came out, film was really held in high regard and TV was kind of there are a couple decent shows, but really, if you want to be serious, you work in film rather than TV. And we've obviously seen a huge shift in the 34 years that I've lived in Los Angeles. Why was it film and not TV that you initially wanted to get? Was it just a residual part of that thinking that was the highest form of the art?
No, I think I never saw behind the curtain of a television show. So I saw the credits growing up, but I didn't know there was a room, there were writers, there was this system of telling a story. And so the thing that I did see dramatized was the screenwriter who writes a feature that eventually gets made. You go to a premiere of your movie, that sort of thing. But it wasn't until I literally brought my boss coffee, opened a door and saw a room full of writers, everybody in sweatshirts. I was like, I want to do that. I want to do that.
Is that like the moment when the Land of Oz turns to color? You said,
Yeah,
what is happening here?
That's what happened. That's what happened.
Now, let me ask you this, Janine, what city are you from? Where were you born?
I was born in Newton, Mass. I grew up in Newton, Mass, and then I moved to Reston, Virginia.
Okay. Oh, very interesting. And Shawn, you were born in Rockford, Illinois?
Rockford, Illinois, in between Chicago and Mass and Wisconsin on I-90. One of my best friends from college is from Newton, though. So
wow.
I've been there.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been there too. A nice little town. Reason why I asked is so interesting, Shawn, that your mother and father were both Democrat and Republican. I'm sure that your writing kind of came from that. The conflict, the drama, between two people who don't necessarily see eye to eye politically. Janine, your parents the same place in terms of political leanings? Were they on the same page? What made you a dramatist?
Oh, they were on the same page. I just think I grew up seeing a lot of drama. I mean, I grew up, with a father. My mom was a teacher. My dad was amazing. He worked in a tech company, then eventually at the Pentagon. He battled alcoholism. And so I just saw drama, and I saw stuff with families, family reunions. And I thought, oh, the conflict is the scene. Like this aunt and this uncle will always fight, this cousin and this cousin. And I just kind of observed it like wallpaper and sort of saw it. I don't know. I don't know. Do you kind of see stuff like that, Shawn, as well? Like,
Well, my parents weren't fighters necessarily, but we certainly but my mother came from a small family. She was an only child. My father was the youngest of 6, and so we had all these cousins on one side of the family, but none on the other. And there were some troublemakers. I mean, I recall very distinctly, like, watching the local news with my father one day and hearing the news report that one of my cousins had been arrested for bank robbery. And my father just shook his head like, your mom's side of the family. But I would say that a lot of the drama in my family would tend to get buried and not talked about. Like, I have a very expressive Jewish wife who is the youngest of 6, like my father was. And there's always, and the siblings are always going at each other, and it's like so foreign to me. I'm like, why are you guys? I said, no, we love each other, Shawn. Stay out of this. Right. And so, so it's not necessarily that I saw all this drama and had, these events that I had to turn into artwork somehow. But what I would say is that I probably subliminally noticed that there were pieces of art, movies, TV shows, music, that would appeal to both my mother and father, despite their differences. And I was always fascinated. And I think subliminally, I grew up, and when I did become a writer, I wanted to write something that would please both of them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What about you? Is there anyone that you thought about trying to please when you wrote, or were you just trying to please yourself?
I was definitely trying to please my parents and my brother. My brother's a journalist, and I felt like that was like real writing. It was like factual. And what we did was sort of made up writing. So I was always trying to impress him that I actually look at my name. It's on the screen, etc. But I think at the end of the day, you learn to kind of, you are the audience. You have to impress yourself, because the rest of it will drive you nuts, sort of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One piece of advice I always tend to give young writers, when they talk to me and ask for it, I don't try to foist advice on them without being asked. But I always just say, live as interesting a life as possible, because you're going to be trying to draw things from your life. Have interesting friends, have people that are funnier than you, have people that are smarter than you in your circle. So I'm curious about how your life impacted your writing and the things that you wanted to write about.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like my circle of friends, I have a lot of friends that are in the business, but I have a world outside of the business, of some people with like regular 9-to-5 jobs, other people that are in the art world and doing different things. I have people in my neighborhood that I'm really good friends with, of all different ages. Like, I'm friends with older people in my neighborhood because I've seen, like, sitting with them and hearing their stories, I've seen the human experience is kind of the same. We all are kind of dealing with the same things. But I agree with you. It's hard when you're first starting out in the business. You're working so hard that you sort of cut yourself off. But then there becomes this point in the business where you've got to have other things nurturing you, because you don't have anything to pull from. I'm not sure if, like, do you ever feel that way, that you are so busy that it's hard to balance having outside things going on?
I've always been concerned that if I let writing for TV consume too high a percentage of my life, that I would wake up one day and the well would be dry. And that's why I'm always suspicious when people talk about making shows about making TV shows. I always wonder if their life has just become too much making TV shows, and And
Right.
that's what I see. I vowed never to write a TV show about making a TV show, but
It's so insular, so insular.
hopefully I'm so young enough that maybe I'll break that rule one day. But but yeah, one of the great things when I became a boss, rather than being a writer working for other writers, became a boss, was that I could set my own schedule so that I could coach my kids' soccer teams. I could do things in life that would, expose me to the outer world more. And I tried to make that a priority so that it wasn't just, working 14, 16 hours a day.
Yeah, I try to do that as well, because that's the rub. You can't make this your life. You can't make it 24/7.
You have kids?
I have a stepson and he's older. So when I got married, he was 14. And so I went through that sort of period with him. And that was something to draw from, having like stepfather, mother, all of those issues, step kid, and he has siblings. Those were things definitely to like bring stuff, but I didn't have the in the house soccer practice. I had this person's dropped off for the summer, that sort of, yeah.
Yeah, because I had this weird hang up when I was like 23, 24, 25 years old, when I was single, where I had in my head that if I were to marry and settle down, that it would make me a worse writer. That I thought, I'm a guy who, I'm on the edge, I'm writing on the edge, and I'm trying to, and I can be daring, and that's when you become boring. And what I found was the exact opposite, that when I found love and married and had kids, that I think I became a richer, deeper writer. And so I was just curious, so if not having a kid, whether it's relationships, what were the things that kind of matured you and matured your writing? What do you say?
I think marriage, I mean, like really having that a big relationship that is always in your face, that you love someone, you're challenging yourselves, you're growing with someone, you're there through the ups and downs. It doesn't have to be marriage, but for me, that has been a big thing to draw from, because it's like, it's this other human being that you're constantly in love with and in conflict with. It's just all together, and I think also friends relationships. I have a very good circle of friends, and so those dynamics of, as writers, we kind of can draw stuff from people. And so I know how to draw stuff from people where they start to talk. And when I started to realize that those conversations are the mirrors like that need to be held up in writing, I would draw from those things. And then actually, watching parents get older and dealing with that is another big thing that has matured, kind of matured my writing, or what I want to write about. I mean, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I lost my father 9 years ago. I can't believe it's been 9 years. In some ways, it just feels like yesterday. And losing him was a big inspiration for why I wanted to make The Night Agent. To me, despite all the kind of thriller aspects and spy stuff, to me, it was a story about a young man who wanted to know more about his deceased father, but he couldn't, and it sort of tortured him. And because I found out some interesting, not like scandalous, but I found out some interesting things about my father after he died that made me so curious to ask him, like, what was this about? What,
Right.
and just knowing that you wouldn't have the chance. And so having that life experience that informs your point of view on what you want to write and how you want to write it. I think a question, your friends, are any of them writers, or are you like the sole person that any story that happens within the friend group you get it?
No, I have a lot of friends that are writers. I mean, they might not be as giving because they're holding stuff up. They're holding themselves back because they're drawing from that. But I do have a lot of writer friends who are emotive and, let it out. And if something really big happens, they'll say, I'm using that. Or someone will say, I'm using that. I'm using that. Don't use that one. But I think, I think it's the relationships and talking to people and seeing the commonalities of what people are dealing with, that is the impetus for writing certain things, you know. And like I lost my father as well. My mother is now dealing with dementia, and she's here living with us, and it's a lesson every single day, you know, of life, of the human experience, of what's important, what's not important, what memories are big, what stories are big. For whatever reason, my mother loves John Wayne and cowboy stuff. I'm like, can you watch my show? And she's like, yeah, after John Wayne.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this question, both of you guys. You know, your influences a little bit. Let's talk a little about influences. When Janine, when I look at your work, the American dream is, it's like really a thematic run. It runs through all your work. The American dream, just like how will you get it by hook or by crook? And then Shawn, when I look at your work, it feels like you have an absolute duplicitous feeling about law enforcement, the people behind the laws, and it feels as though the murkiness of the three, you know, the 3 days of the Condor is all over your work. So tell me about both your either cinematic influences,
Go ahead.
or TV influences, or music, or poetry, or literary. What do you think has influenced you as a writer how you choose your work, even? You know?
Yeah, I mean, I clearly, listen, coming up and growing up and seeing like Spike Lee stuff, made me go, oh, we can tell stories with Black people in them. And then all of the canon of the filmmakers that he was influenced by, that I kind of then like looked at Melvin Van Peebles and Mario Van Peebles, all of those people. And then the TV shows, you know, that were on that could have had Black people in it, like The Heat of the Night or St. Elsewhere or ER. All of these shows made me kind of want to kind of tell stories that center people of color in them. And I came up on shows, you know, I started in comedy, and then I was on a show called Lush Life, then Jamie Foxx, and then the PJs, but then I transitioned to drama, and I was on ER and Third Watch, first Third Watch, then ER. So I was like mentored by John Wells for like 9 years. And when I was there, you know, I just imagined a world where like, when can, because he was touching on it with this multi-ethnic world of doctors and of police officers. I just couldn't wait to show Black people in the center where I could. And I think the American dream is like the fight to say that we deserve a piece of the pie. And we're going to write I want to write about people that get a piece of the pie. And that is like, from all of the great Black writers, that is kind of what they've all talked about. James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, everyone has talked about the American dream being part our dream. And so I think that influence of, you know, Niecy Nash wanting to launder money and to become a queen pin and to be seen as a force and as a gangster and not to be ignored. And then, you know, in the last project, I was on Claws and I got the Big Cigar in an envelope. I got the Playboy article and I was asked to come, you know, to read it. And the idea of what Huey Newton was doing with the Panthers was fighting for the American dream. And so that is the connection. So it's like all of the great, it's being an English major, reading all of the big white canon, then reading the Black canon, hoping that they can join the canon, and then just being a part of people that want to make sure we are seen. Like, that's just like the drive.
Got it.
You know?
Yep. That's what it feels like when I look at Walker, look at all the work you've done. The American dream just jumps out. I mean, Huey is all about the American dream. Give me my piece, you know. So,
Yeah. Give me my piece. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of what it is. I don't know, Shawn, what is your through line or your big influence?
Yeah, I've done law enforcement shows, I've done military shows. When I look back, I'd say that I'm interested in people with power and how they use and or abuse it. And I'm interested in the price that we ask our heroes to pay to do the things that we want them to do. Now, I will say that the things that inspired me aren't necessarily of that genre or of that ilk. When I started to become aware, I watched TV, I watched way too much TV as a kid, but it was a lot of, fairly disposable TV. But then when I was a teenager, Cheers came out, and that was very impactful on me. The movie Diner came out, and that really affected me. These young people sort of talking seemingly about nothing, but their lives were important. And then this might sound strange, but I would say that Siskel and Ebert were really impactful because I was coming home from college now, video stores were a thing, and I'd come home and they would tell me like what I should watch, right? Which ran the gamut from big movies to documentaries like Gates of Heaven, which was a Roger Ebert favorite. I watched She's Gotta Have It. Speaking of Spike Lee, I watched that home one summer. My father walked in and was like, "What the hell is this?" But I was watching it because Siskel and Ebert told me that it was worth watching, and it was. And so that's where I started to see such a variety of things that you could do. And then I always liked mysteries. I was a big reader as a kid, and it started off with Bobbsey Twin mysteries, then Hardy Boy mysteries, and then Agatha Christie, and so I've always had this compulsion about crimes and how they're solved and the motivations why people do the things they do.
Yes, yeah.
I'm fascinated with that.
But
And it's cool to write about fallible people. I mean, that's the thing that has brought in, you've done it so brilliantly, but in the last 20 years, 25 years, is to write messy people that are not all good and not all bad. They are very gray. And that interests me too, because I feel like most of us are pretending to be good and we're a little bit gray,
Yeah.
Yeah, we're a lot gray.
Yeah.
Lisa
And
Flash's character is gray as they come, and of course Vic Mackey is the grayest they're going to come.
Yeah.
Well, I got another thing I tell writers is I say the problem that you have trying to break in this business is that you really need three things to happen for you, and you can only control one. You need to have natural talent, and you either have it or you don't as a writer. You can improve it. You need some luck somewhere along your career, and then you need a work ethic, and that's the one that you can control. I was very fortunate that I had the luck to have the idea for Vic Mackey just as FX was looking to change how TV was done, and that they were looking for these sort of morally ambiguous characters. Because I think if I had written The Shield 3 years earlier or 3 years later, it probably doesn't get made. And so I was very lucky that TV caught up. I would say that 2000s TV was kind of the equivalent of 1970s film in terms of the opening of the gates and sort of taking on daring stuff. Certainly Oz and The Sopranos started that in the late 1990s. But then you had this explosion of things that we were fortunate to be a part of.
Yeah, I remember literally being on the Warner Brothers lot. I was on Third Watch and I'd seen The Shield and I was like, what the hell? He shot his partner. Like literally. We were like, what just happened? And I can remember where our whole writer's room, we were walking and talking and we were just blown away of that moment of, oh, characters can do that. Characters don't, it just turned all of our expectations on its head. And it was just so brilliant, so brilliant.
Well, thanks. It's always fun when, as a group of writers, you can talk about something. We certainly would come into the Nash Bridges offices and talk about the Sopranos episode that aired the Sunday before. I remember there was a time, it's sad, we don't make as many pilots anymore, and the pilots are kept under lock and key, but there was a time when everybody could get a hold of videotapes of like all the pilots that were made, the ones that were picked up,
Yes.
the ones that weren't picked up. And I remember being in Nash Bridges and we were watching like a pilot like at every lunch that we were having, and we stuck in the pilot for this weirdly titled thing called Freaks and Geeks.
Um,
And like for the first 2 minutes, we were like so snarky about, oh, look at this, it's high school, blah, blah, blah. And like 5 minutes in, we're all leaning in. By the end, we're like, that's the best pilot we've ever seen. And all of us were just like, oh my God, that was amazing.
yeah.
And so when somebody makes something that makes the rest of us jealous, it's I think it's such an amazing thing that because they've expanded what this career and what the genre can be, and so with the Shield, and maybe this is where the conversation transitions into genre. For the Shield, I'd watched so many police shows. I'd written on a police show for 3 years. I knew all the conventions. I knew all the rules. And so I just start with the premise of how do I break the rules of what people expect in a cop show. And I think like Freaks and Geeks, I think did the same thing with a high school show. The Sopranos obviously did it, with a gangster show. Mad Men did it in a business world. Game of Thrones does it, in the sort of genre fantasy space. And I think Succession did it in the corporate world, so Atlanta is another show that I'm really
Totally
with
did it.
in terms of, I don't even know what genre it was subverting, but it feels like it was subverting something.
The surreal genre.
Yeah, which is amazing.
Yes.
And we haven't seen it before.
Yes.
Especially-
So I'm always excited when somebody comes up with an idea and puts a show on that feels like, oh, this wasn't what we knew the television universe to be, and now our universe and the possibilities are bigger.
Yeah.
What were some of the shows for you that were like, wow, that
I've never seen that before. I mean, one of the first ones was ER. I had never seen inside of a hospital the way I saw that. So when I got to write on ER, I was just blown away. You hadn't seen fallible doctors that were dealing with humor, life, death. They're a sex addict. They're a drug addict. They're doing all of these things.
They have HIV.
They're HIV, and then they're saving lives. So that was like a huge thing.
That pilot, I was in Hollywood trying to break in, and that pilot when it aired was like an earthquake.
Yeah.
Like, wow.
Too. Yeah, it was amazing.
Like what? Yeah, and I think, and that kind of feeling, I was on the final 4 years, was throughout its airing, like that feeling of this is something completely different. I think I felt the same way when I saw Succession and I saw Atlanta. I'm trying to think of what else. Baby Reindeer now. It's something where it is not what I expect. In the show that I have on right now, one of the reasons that attracted me to it is that when I read the article and I talked to Jim Hecht, who wrote the pilot, we were developing the pilot, and the notion of doing a caper and doing a history, like a biopic, and contextualizing the Panthers was interesting to me, because how do you actually get people to sit down and watch a biopic? People just don't want to watch them right now. So I thought the mixture of a caper and a hard drama was an interesting tone. But I'm looking at that as well, how do we mix it up? Because right now, it's like they want to go backwards to what's safe, but we all know in TV that it's the bolder that will actually, make it.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you and I share something in common, which is that we started off our careers in network TV in 22 episode season.
Yeah.
And now there's a stigma it seems like for a lot of writers of, oh, network TV, I want to work for the cool Netflix show, or I want to work on the cool Apple thing. I certainly have my opinions, but I'm interested in hearing yours first. What did you learn doing 22 episodes a year network TV, and what are the advantages starting off in that system, do you think?
I mean, what I learned was how to tell stories and write fast. I mean, when you actually have to do 22 or 24, sometimes ER was 26. I did Criminal Minds as well, like 26, you hoped you only wrote 5 episodes. And so the notion that you are not as precious, you realize this episode might be a C plus, and it has to just keep it moving. This episode might be an A minus, but it has to just keep going. You try to make everyone an A, but it's sometimes the alchemy of the shows don't work. And I fear people who are a little snobby about, I only want to go on cable, because in coming up, if you go on network television, just the stability and how you're able to learn and be on set and produce your episodes and be in editing. This Big Cigar was 6 episodes. We did it over it. I've been on it for 6 years.
Wow.
We had 2 rooms. We had one year was just dealing with the pilot, and then the next year was a room. And then we went down after we did 3 episodes. We went down for 7 months, and we were told, get a star, get a big director. We got a star, we got a big director, and then another room started for the final 3. But that people, I mean, we fought for this in the guild. People who aren't on overalls and don't have companies, they can't do those deals.
Right.
But back in the day, the notion of knowing you had 24 episodes, there was something that was not on the table. And what that is that you weren't fearing employment. You weren't fearing, like, was your rent going to get paid, or could you buy a house? You knew, like, I have a job. It goes from June till March. If I do really well on the job, they're going to bring me back. I can go on a vacation. I can go home and see my family. And on top of it, I, got to produce hundreds of episodes of television, which just gives you this memory. I mean, what do you feel about that now?
Very, very similarly. I'm really grateful. I did 3 years on Nash Bridges and then a year on Angel before The Shield was made. And what's funny is that I was considered extraordinarily inexperienced at that time to be handed the showrunner reins on a show that I created. It was much more common for them to bring in somebody senior over, and for whatever reason, FX just didn't do that. But when I look back, I had worked on 88 episodes, 86, 88 episodes of TV before I got that job, which is the equivalent of working on 8 or 9 seasons of a streaming show.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And
if you're lucky.
In fact, you see a lot of people coming in never having worked on a show, or they worked 2 seasons on some streaming show. They did 16 episodes, which I had knocked out in my first 7 months of working on Nash Bridges.
Yeah.
And so I felt extraordinarily prepared, even though I'd only been on staff for 4 years when The Shield came along. Now, some of that was ignorance because there was plenty I had to learn, it turns out, and there were a lot of mistakes I had to make to learn from. But to me, and also these streaming shows that you pointed out, 6 years to make 6 episodes, even if things go right, it's taking you a year and a half. Night Agent, the process so far has been about a year and a half to make 10 episodes.
Yeah.
Each season, and that's, you're not getting assigned as many scripts to write.
Yeah.
You're not seen as much. So I always tell people, hey, if you get a chance early in your career to work on a network show, seriously consider it, because there are lots of advantages to doing it.
I have a question for you guys in terms of craft. This question is about, as a showrunner, you do 7 jobs, but you're really great at 2 or 3. What are those 2 or 3?
Go ahead, Jenny.
I think I'm really good at running the room. When I run the room, and being a cullender for people's ideas, kind of figuring out what do I like, what do I not like. It's also, you know, managing people, which is the hard part of the job, is managing all of the people and the personalities. If you get a great line producer, that can definitely help you. And, you know, production, I actually love production. There's a new thing now that there's shorter orders. When there used to be large orders, a show kind of knew what it was. So you could send anyone to set, they could cover it, they could call you, blah, blah, blah. But sometimes when you're doing a limited series, the showrunner is on the set because you're dealing with actors who might want to change things on the fly, or something in the location doesn't work. You know what I mean? So I love production because it's a place to kind of see the words come to life. And I'd also say, you know, I'm getting better at post. It's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to find what the real story is in it. But I enjoy it because I know that that's like the final way to tell it. And it's your final chance to tell it before you put it on the stage. What about you, Shawn? What do you love?
I would say being in the editing room is the best thing I do.
Yeah.
I would say that I don't run my rooms anymore. I come in and comment. I like to give them things to start at, and I like to leave them for a little bit to kind of work it and shape it and get them to try to impress me. I think I'm good at polishing the scripts. I think I'm good at my director tone meetings in terms of getting the director on the same page with the show. I always say I'm not here to tell you how to direct it, but I'm here to make sure that we all agree on what every scene is about, what it's really about.
I agree with you. The tone meetings are the most important meeting. Expressing to the director what is the story.
Yeah, and I'm told by directors that I have what they consider to be unusually long and detailed tone meetings, and I'm just kind of in shock because I'm like, why would anyone take less time and be less detailed?
How long are yours?
Well, I do a general speech that can be shorter if it's a director who's worked for me before. Yeah, but I do a general principles thing that takes about an hour. And then an episode will take 3.5 hours.
That's what I've done too. Like the 3 hours is the tone meeting. It's long if it's good, because
but it saves you so much time later on if you do it right.
Yeah. A lot of times, I mean, I find this when you're dealing with a serialized show that's ongoing, you have a lot of times you have directors that come in and they want to, how do I say, sometimes they want to twist it so much, and you want to just bring them down to say, like, this is actually the story we're telling. And all of these people in the room, in this meet, like at the Tech Scout, are going to help you do this. But that is our opportunity to kind of say, this is how the story will go. Because if you don't do them well, when you see the dailies, which I watch the dailies, you're gonna go, what is that?
That's funny. I don't watch dailies.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we have 2 to 3 hours of dailies a day, and
I don't watch all. Yeah.
And you know, there was a time when I was writing 2 shows at once, S.W.A.T and The Night Agent, and it wasn't feasible to spend my time watching dailies. What I would do instead is I do send writers to set to produce the episodes that they write. And I ask the writers at the end of each day of shooting to write what I call a set report that goes through, you know, each scene, what we got, whether there were problems. They give us some preferred takes. The editors are on that email chain so that they can sort of see and highlight things. And if there's a scene that they say was problematic for whatever reason, I'll tell the editor, you know, focus on that scene and let me know if you think it's a problem.
Got you. Got you. That's good. No, that's good. The editor
And
knows.
so I find that to be more efficient than watching dailies.
Yeah.
And I also like to be surprised when I see a director's cut. I like not to have seen multiple takes of everything. I like to see it as an episode. And I think it would be harder if I was really steeped in the dailies.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Maybe 50 minutes in this conversation, we should turn it to genre a little bit.
Well, I want to talk about that right now, just to talk mostly about your two shows are highly praised and out there right now, Night Agent and the Big Cigar. What genre do you think these shows are exactly? How would you define them? Are they cross genres? What genre is this, and what genre were you writing in when you started the process of these shows?
Janine?
I mean, I think we made a decision that the Big Cigar was going to be a mixture of a caper. So it would be a thriller with humor in it. And the Panther side was going to be a drama, which really contextualized the seriousness of what the Panthers were going through. But the caper, the hard part, and this is, you know, some people love the mix and some people don't love the mix. You know what I mean? That's some people
hard to do.
It's hard to do. Jim had done Winning Time, and so he had dealt with the genre before. So, you know, it was, I think it's the only way to do it, because I don't think you could I think if you test people on the biopics they've seen or the bio limited series they've seen, most people haven't seen a lot of them. It's very hard to get people to like commit to it in this time period of where we are. So I would say it's a caper mixed with humor, a comedy, and then mixed with a solid, you know, drama.
It felt like Argo for a bit, and then it felt like Carlos. I don't know if you ever saw the series Carlos, about Carlos the terrorist, you know, with Edgar Ramirez. Incredible show. He goes around the world during the 1970s and creating terror all over the place. And it's very dramatic, but it's also funny in places, but darkly funny, but really, really, really steeped in that sort of suspense thriller genre. So, I was looking at your show, I said, I wonder if it's a suspense thriller genre we're talking about here for a Big Cigar.
I mean, it is people have been describing it as a thriller drama mixed with a comedy because of the caper. But it has both, you know, it has, and that's the thing. You either, you know, you get it, or you're kind of like, I want one or the other.
Right. Yeah. You nail it. You don't. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you nailed it. You nailed it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, I think everyone did great. Jim did amazing. And the whole staff, it has been a pleasure, because you guys know it's so hard to get them done.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, history pieces.
Oh yeah, I just did one.
Yeah, you know, it's hard. It's hard.
Shawn, what do you think?
Yeah.
Well, I would say that nominally, The Night Agent is a political thriller that's spy adjacent. Our main character is not a spy, so it's not, you know, purely a spy thriller. But I'd like to think it's more than that. I spent a lot of time thinking before we made this show, because I feel like, speaking of genre, that this sort of political thriller genre has tended to do better in film than in TV. You referenced 3 Days of the Condor, which is a touchstone. But I don't know if you've watched 3 Days of the Condor recently.
I watched it just last year. It's outdated now.
Well, a lot of it holds up, but like the relationship between
Amazing.
well, the relationship between Robert Redford and what's her name? Oh my God.
Faye Dunaway.
Yeah, Faye Dunaway.
Yes.
Is kind of ridiculous, because he kidnaps her, he ties her up in an apartment,
That's what I'm saying. It's kind
like
of
terrorize, and then he comes back, and then they screw. It's
Yeah.
like really bizarre.
right.
And
He'd be arrested by now, you know.
yes, and so what I realized is that, well, the political thriller tends to work in the movie format because you can just be plot driven for 2 hours and boom, 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 twist, 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 and it's done. But people who've tried that formula in TV, I think, have failed because you can't just rely on plot to get you through 10 episodes of TV the way you can a 2-hour movie. And so while it is a political thriller, we have tried to make it much more character based, where you're going to spend time with the bad guys when they're not doing bad things.
Yeah.
You're gonna have multiple storylines that eventually intersect. I would say 24 was one of the few shows that did it really well. And so I would say that we're a cousin of 24, maybe. So it's political thriller, but with much more of a TV-based emphasis on character than you usually see this genre played in film.
I see. Good. Yeah, because I was watching it and I really enjoyed it, and I kept thinking, feels like kind of a Manchurian Candidate kind of, all the things that you expect in a thriller genre, like the Parallax View, anything that Alan Pakula might have done. But every character, not sure if they are in on it or not. You don't know.
Yeah, there's an element to that. And then I would also say it's a classic underdog story. I would say that I'm a big fan through Siskel and Ebert of Hitchcock movies.
Mhm.
And so many Hitchcock movies are about a normal, regular person who finds himself in extraordinary circumstances.
Right.
And I'm always quick to say, like, we're not the Bourne Identity. Like, our guy can't kill 5 people in a room by himself. Like, if he's got 5 people in a room with guns on him, he's gonna die.
Right.
So how does he prevent himself from getting in those situations?
Right.
So so there's an underdog element that I really like, and it's based on a book, so I have to give credit for a lot of this to Matthew Quirk, the novelist who wrote The Night Agent. He's the least important person working in the White House, and I like that as a conceit, the least important person in a very important place, who then becomes very important because of the course of events.
Yeah, well done. I want to just tell everybody who's watching that you can submit your questions now to Shawn and Janine, and we can ask them. We'll put them into the Q&A box, and I will look at them and send them directly to them. We can talk about some of the things you like to know. Another question I want to ask you about, let me go back in the past a little bit. With Claws and with The Shield, TNT and FX were essentially rebranded by how successful those shows were. How did that make you, how did your career sort of take off after that? With both those shows kind of rebranding these two networks.
Well, I've been employed ever since the show premiered. So I would say that it's kept me working. It was a special time. What FX did, and HBO to a certain degree had done it before, but what FX did was they realized that there was a niche, that rather than trying to be a show that 20% of America watched out of habit or boredom or because it came on after Wheel of Fortune, that they wanted to make shows that 3% of America, this was their favorite show. And they would go out of their way and change their schedule in their life to make sure they didn't miss it. This was before streaming and sort of watching, everything on your own timetable. And so what was great was that the creative notes we got were oftentimes designed not to appeal to the majority of people, but to make this show as singular and different from everything else as possible. And so that was really, so it was very gratifying. When we made the show, a lot of us kind of assumed that nobody watches anything on FX. Will people even watch this? But we just focused on making as good a pilot as we could and then a series as we could, and we were fortunate that people did watch. So what can I say? It was gratifying. You know, you get nominated for awards, and people love the show, and we were very. It was like being. Here's what it was like. It wasn't being like the biggest musical act around, but it was being like the really cool act that all the college kids listen to. Do you know what I mean? You
Yeah,
know,
the underground band. Yeah.
yeah, we were the Kinks, you
Yeah.
know,
I love it.
rather than the Captain and Tennille. You know, it was, and there was something cool about that.
Yeah.
I
Janine?
mean, the same sort of thing. I mean, when Claus hit Sarah Aubrey, who is now at HBO Max, she was, you know, running TNT, and she just put the money behind the show. And instead of kind of saying no, 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 she was like more, 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 do more. And everything got bigger, better, and the resources just were there. Because sometimes you don't have the budget to do what you want to do. And you've got to have the partners at the studio and the network. I mean, I remember Peter Roth at the time was head of Warner Brothers, and he said, "You've got to stop this." You know what I mean? It's like, it's so expensive. And I was like, but I have support. I have support from
They support me. They love
He's
me.
supporting me. I mean, so what? We're gonna reshoot the opening and do a black and white honeymooners homage, you know, with Niecy and somebody. We just did things because I think everyone, you know, at Warner's and at TNT, they just knew like you had to do bold stuff to actually get noticed. That's the hardest part of television now, is that was the beginning of it, you know, with Instagram and everything. But now it's like people are deciding if they're going to doom scroll on their phone or watch your show.
Right.
So it's hard to just, you know, tell a story that everybody will see. You know, you're relying on water cooler, you're relying on people talking about it. And I think, like Shawn was saying, the idea is just to be as bold and as cool as you possibly can be, because you can't kind of control the other part of it.
True.
You know,
We have a question that, our first question that came in for both. What do you like to read when you're staffing? What do you look for?
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, I look for an original voice, a really good pilot that somebody loves that pops off the page. I don't read specs like that anymore that are replicas of shows. I don't think I've read them for a long time, but I do read in the genre of the show that I'm on, so that if it's a soap or if it's a medical show or if it's legal, like I want to kind of know that you can write character and that the sample pops, because again, you get so many samples that it's not a joke. You read the first 10 pages. If the first 10 pages pop and you want to read more, then you will read more. But if they are flat, you don't even have time to do it. I don't know. What do you say, Shawn?
I think this may be our first disagreement tonight, because I miss the days of specs. And now writers don't write them really much anymore. When I said that I wrote 16 specs before I got a staff job, 15 of those were specs of existing TV shows. Only one was a pilot that I had written. And I think it really prepared me for when I did get hired on Nash Bridges, for how am I going to write like Carlton Cuse and John Worth want me to write for this show. I had this experience writing in other people's voices. I also think what's really great about writing specs is that you don't have to world build in order. So it's like, okay, the world's there. I just need to come up with a premise for the episode. And so I was able to crank out 3, 4, 5, 6 spec scripts a year doing that. So I got better as a writer, because I think the more scripts you write, the better. So I agree. I haven't read a spec because people don't tend to write
They
them.
don't write them. Yeah, that's what I should have prefaced it. I loved writing specs and I loved reading them, but I might have seen someone write a Succession. I don't, people don't submit them.
They don't, and you know, sometimes you'll hire a writer on your show that has written a really good original script, and you think, oh, this is a really good writer, and I'm going to bring them on, and then you sadly find out that that's all they can write. They can't write this thing over here. And you're disappointed, and there's nothing worse than when you make a wrong hiring decision, because it's hard on you, it's hard on them. And so I'm just looking for proof of concept. So nothing would make me happier than if I could read 2 samples of a writer, one an original voice thing, and the other a spec. And of course I get it, there's 500 shows on, and they might, in fact, it's likely that they're writing a spec for a show I don't know and haven't seen. So I get it was different when I was coming up, and you know, it was all network TV and 1 or 2 HBO shows. And if you wrote a Law and Order, everyone knew Law and Order. If you wrote NYPD Blue, they knew that.
We all
Right.
wrote.
Yeah, why it's not done, but I hate to be one of these, I miss the old days guys.
Yeah.
But I thought writing specs made writers better writers, and I thought it made it easier to judge whether they'd be able to write for your show. How good were they at recreating that voice for that show? I miss those days.
Yeah, I wonder. Go ahead,
So I
Jen.
was gonna say, I miss that too. You just don't get them as much at all. Yeah.
But for anyone listening, I'd be impressed if you had an original and a spec and both were killer. That would be like, I'd be like, this is a person I should really think about.
Undeniable. Yeah.
I wonder if anybody ever wrote a spec Sopranos, you know.
I wrote a spec Sopranos.
Yeah.
There it is. Okay. You wanted to work on the show. You didn't get on the show.
In fact, I think it was the last spec I wrote.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Then I got work, and so I wrote it while I was on staff with Next Bridges, and I was like, well, if this show doesn't work out, I'm going to need a spec, and Sopranos is cool, and I want to try my voice at that. So yeah, so I wrote a spec Sopranos. It was about Michael accidentally killing a civilian during a heist, and sort of weird pangs of conscience that he had. It was one thing to kill people in the life, but it was another thing to like kill an innocent by accident. And so I still remember.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Next question from Maria Elena Rodriguez. You both had the experience where you ran shows that you did not originate, either a long form, a running franchise, or in support of a newer creator learning the show running ropes. How do you approach those kinds of jobs as both a writer and a manager? Is it fulfilling or frustrating?
Yes. It's both. It is fulfilling and it's frustrating. I tend to, if I take on that challenge, if I take on it's one thing if I'm partying up. Like there was one show, Lie to Me, where the creator just wanted to do something else, and he asked me if I would step in, and the studio asked me, but he wasn't really involved afterwards. So then I was just sort of running it. But when I've worked with people to help them with shows they've created, I feel a debt to their vision. I feel an obligation to their vision, and so my job changes into their protector rather than my own advocate. It's not about always what I want. It's about how best to serve what they want. Now, sometimes I'll tell them, I think it would be better if we did this, you know, and things like that. But in cases like Mad Dogs with Chris Cole, working with Aaron Thomas on S.W.A.T, Ted Griffin on Terriers, you know, my job was, I was like, you came up with these characters, you came up with this thing, it was good enough to get made, and people trusted me when I was early in my career, and I want to trust you and help you do it.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. It all depends on the dynamic, but the goal is to help. It's a weird it's a weird thing in the business that you can have a great idea, but you might not have the experience to get it up the hill. And so you partner with people that have the experience, that can vouch for the creator or the person that doesn't have the experience. So I've found it's amazing if you actually believe that person's idea is great and you think that there's something you can add to it and you know how to get it up the hill. And, you know, on this show, the article was written by Josh Berman, who wrote the Playboy article. And then I sat with him and Jim Hacks, and Jim Hacks hadn't done a lot of television, but he was a great writer and he had a great vision for how the show would be. And I thought like, oh, I can help him get it there. I can help do it. But I think all of it is hard. It's hard to get your own creations done. It's hard to show run someone else's thing. I think the barometer is the story amazing? And for me, sometimes I pass on jobs a lot when someone's like, here's a writer, they've got this script or they've got this idea, and I actually just don't like it. And it might be to fulfill something with the studio, or my studio wants me to step in and help on it. But I pass on things that I don't like. If I don't like the story or I don't vibe with the person's writing, I don't do it. But I do think there's something to be said about collaborating with experience and someone who's getting the experience, who has what you perceive as a lightning in a bottle idea, you know? And so I don't think it's frustrating. I think it could be frustrating if you get with, you know, an asshole or something.
Yep. Next question. This is from an anonymous person who's listening. Shawn, you wrote the greatest TV finale of all time. Could he talk
Debatable, but thank you.
Could he talk broadly about the process, trade secrets for keeping a show on track and setting the groundwork over several seasons to find such a satisfying resolution?
Well, I have an answer that I don't know how satisfying this answer will be, which is that we just took each season one at a time. There was no grand plan that like, oh, we're going to set this up in season 1 and we're going to pay it off in season 7. But what I will say was that I was very draconian about if we had established something earlier in the show, we couldn't violate it later because we had a cool moment that we could play instead. And so as the seasons progressed and we had stayed true, you know, season 2 didn't violate anything from season 1, season 3 the same. So by the time you get to season 7, you have these things and the puzzle has come together. You didn't plan for the puzzle to come together this way, but it did. And then I would say there was something very impactful as we headed into season 6. John Landgraf, who was not there when The Shield began. I think he started at FX during the 3rd season, but I find that like sometimes converts are the biggest believers. He had never watched The Shield before he came to FX, and then he came and really loved it and became a big fan. And he really encouraged me, as we knew we were approaching the end, to think about the show in Shakespearean terms and think about, you know, are there grand victories? Are there grand tragedies? You know, even though the show felt very grounded and realistic, can you get something that feels a little operatic and grand in there? And so we just approach it. Let's stay true. Let's go back as we approach the final season and think about all the things we've done. Are there loose threads we want to tie? Are there things that work? And listen, I had an extraordinary group of writers who've gone on to great success since the show. And so it wasn't some singular vision of mine. It was the best decision were the hiring decisions I made and working with that group of writers. So I appreciate the question and I take the compliment. And we worked hard to make the show good from season 1 to season 7. And I'm glad for the person asking the question that it felt that way to them. The secret was just staying true to everything that we had written before and not violating it for a nice moment.
Great. Next question from Dylan Gallagher. Janine, I love Claws and its tonal balance of humor amid serious, entertaining drama. How did you know how far to push the show's humor? Was that balance something you knew from the start or something you discovered as the show went into multiple seasons?
I think we just knew that it needed to be funny, but then cut it with really serious drama. And so as long as it feels real and there's life and death stakes, then we knew like you can be funny and then you just then you just pull the rug from underneath somebody and you make them feel. And so that was sort of the rhythm. And it's bizarre because that was the rhythm of ER. And that's kind of the John Wells rhythm. You see that in some of his shows of being humorous, then very dramatic, humorous, then very dramatic. So there were definite times on Claws where we went too far. And we said, when we got into the editing room, I was like, oh, this is too broad. Because the object is not to be broad, it's to be grounded.
Right.
And so if it gets broad, you've kind of lost the sauce. But if it's grounded, then you can believe that the character is dealing with life and death situations. Yeah, that's a great question.
Good. Anonymous question here for both. A lot of writers who've switched to only writing pilots still have old specs in the drawer. Would you be opposed to reading specs of older hit shows?
I'm not opposed. This is a story from the 90s. I forget who did it, but I heard that somebody in the 1990s had written a spec Mary Tyler Moore Show episode. Or maybe it was a Dick Van Dyke Show, but one of those two. And I thought, oh, that's brilliant. Everyone knows that show. You can write something that does it. So if somebody wrote an episode of ER, or Mad Men, I would love to read it. Now you're going to pick a great show that's in the canon of, TV history. So the bar is going to be high. So you better hit it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think great writing is great writing. If I saw Mary Tyler Moore or Dick Van Dyke or ER or something, I would definitely read that. I would definitely read it. Because what you're looking at is how creative is that person. And that's like the first test they've passed because they've done something that is bold that nobody would expect. So yeah, I would definitely.
Good. This is one of the future questions. Daniel O says, where do you see the industry going at this point? Everything seems to be in flux right now with the end of peak TV and studios tightening their belts. I'm very interested in fantasy genres. Where should I be looking to start? CW isn't CW anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a great loss, the CW, for writers. So many people got their careers started there. I think there's going to be a correction. Certainly there's a financial correction. Certainly there's a reduction in the number of shows correction that's happening. I think one of the good corrections that might happen is that I think too much of TV has been filmified in the last 7 to 8 years. Getting these big monster stars who make these huge salaries, empowering directors over writers on some of these shorter series things. One of the things I'm most proud of with The Night Agent is, that was a story, like I said, about the guy who's the least important person in the White House, works in the windowless room in the basement. And I was getting all these casting suggestions of these name actors who were all like 35 to 40 years old, because there's very few like famous, well-known 24, 25, 26-year-old actors, right? Unless you're Tom Holland, or something like that.
Right.
And so I finally just asked Netflix, I said, listen, it's one thing if it's a 25, 26-year-old guy who's working, this job and he's the bottom of the ladder. But if it's like a 38-year-old guy that's like in that room, like it's suddenly like a little bit more pathetic. I said, are you open to discovering TV, discovering a star in this role? Because when I grew up, we always adhered to the motto, TV makes stars.
That's right.
Movies take stars, TV makes stars. And I hope that and TV stories always were smaller, but they were more intimate and they were oftentimes more personal, and you got to know these people over an extended period of time and they mattered to you. And I think so much of TV has been trying to go for the spectacle to get attention. And it's taken the worst aspects of film, in my opinion, and applied them to the TV business, and it's made costs out of control. And so I think there's an opportunity when we make these shows for less money going forward to adhere to what always worked in shows like ER. Is that the characters matter.
Yeah.
And the best scenes can be two people in a room talking.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I hope that that's where it's going.
I hope that's where it goes. I think for young people starting, I think you can't commit to the genre only that you're going to write in. I think you've got to make sure you have a swath of stuff. If you write fantasy genre, that's great. But I would also say have something in your arsenal that is a mystery, whatever kind of mystery that is, because have something that's a family drama or something. You just need different tentacles in your career to get a job, because I do think the crunch is real, and a lot of people are feeling the crunch and they're feeling like they can't get hired. But I do believe that if you have the right sample, I know writers hate networking, but you've got to kind of network to meet people to get your spec in the right person's hand. If you write a really great spec, I think eventually somebody will find it. I mean, whether it's a great spec or a great pilot, somebody will find it. But it is different than like when we're coming up on Third Watch and ER and Nash Bridges, where there wasn't so many shows and there were these big shows where you could learn on. So now you just have to be very, very strategic in writing multiple things.
Right. This is from anonymous attendee. Having created and written on so many great shows, what do you each consider to be your greatest accomplishments in your career?
Janine?
I haven't gotten there yet. I'm still climbing the ladder. I've got, babies that I'm trying to get off the ground. And I am one of those writers that I'm so proud of all of the shows that I've been on and that I've been a part of show running, the ones I've created and the ones I've just show run. I love them. But the feeling of the writer feeling of are you done yet? And have you made the thing that you're most proud of? I think I'm still in the process every day of doing that. And I don't mean it to sound like generic to say, oh, I loved everything I've been on. I just feel grateful for everything. But I also look to the future with like hope of like, creating that big thing that, is undeniable.
I made peace a long time ago that The Shield would be the first show mentioned on my in my obituary.
How did you deal with that? How did you deal
and
with
I was still in my 30s when,
it's huge.
I guess I turned 40 before the show ended, but I was like 34, I think, when the show started. And I was like, you know what, that's okay. But like you, I'm still delusional enough to think I can do better. And so I'm gonna keep trying. Or you succeed in a different way. The Night Agent might not be as critically acclaimed as The Shield, but a hell of a lot of people watched it. And a hell of a lot of people
love the show.
enjoyed it. Right. And so success has different metrics. And or writing a show. The Shield was a very cynical, pessimistic show, which is actually the opposite of how I think of myself as a person. And so I'm interested, like, okay, I've succeeded over there. Let me try to succeed over here, So I'm extraordinarily proud of the Shield. But I'm okay if that ends up being, the thing in my career, but I love, like Janine, I love trying to one up it.
So
Thank-
that's a big one. That's a big one.
Great one. Gabe asked, thank you both for being here. My question, you talked about the positives of network TV from the point of view of a writer's career. About the positives from an art point of view, do you feel there are positive elements to network stories that are more accepted than they are in streaming?
Well, I think I understand the question. Listen, coming from the Midwest, a lot of people there watch network TV, right? And sometimes we can focus on the LA and New York media centers and think that that's the whole world, but it's not. On S.W.A.T, we did a story about school shootings that we researched the hell out of it. I just felt it would be dishonest to do a show and not touch that subject because at that time, there had just been a rash of them. And I wanted to show the impact of it. And I'm extraordinarily proud creatively of that episode. That may be the episode I'm the most proud of in the last 10, 15 years of stuff I've done. I've seen enough amazing ER episodes, to know the kind of impact that had. So I just like to do a lot of different things. So I don't want to only do network TV, but I love the business, and I'm saddened that there are fewer and fewer, 22 episode network shows every year. But great creative work can and is being done on them.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think writers shouldn't turn their nose on network television. I think that is what the majority of people watch. When you go to the grocery store or you go to a gas station, that is what people watch. And people watch NCIS, people watch Criminal Minds. They watch these mega hits around the world in every country.
And over again for years.
Exactly, over and over.
I mean, my daughter started watching Criminal Minds on streaming like a couple of years ago. Never watched it when it was on the air, but now just eats them up.
Yeah.
Everybody I know watches Law and Order all the time.
All the time. And so I think if you have the opportunity to tell story in any shape, I think you've got to do it. You've got to do it. Because it's so hard. People think it's hard to get on Succession. It's hard to get on NCIS. Like
with those residuals?
Yes.
That money. Forget Succession. Get on that show.
There's somebody laughing. There's somebody laughing.
Yeah.
Trust me, those NCIS writers are like, we are doing great.
Yes. Yeah. I think we have time for one more or two more questions. This is from Ethan Banville, and it's to you, Janine. Janine, Ethan says, I was in the WB Comedy Writers Workshop with Janine, and I love to know what made her switch to Hour Long shortly after. Clearly a great choice. Thanks.
Oh, funny. Listen, I was on a few comedies, and I wrote a feature that got the attention of John Wells's company. And at the time, I was partnered with someone. We were only partnered for a couple of years in our career. And when we met with Andrew Stern, who was running the company, he loved the feature. It wound up not getting made, but he had job openings. And at the same time, we met with Marta Kaufman and David Crane on
Friends.
And so when we went into the David Crane meeting, he said, I hear you guys are about to get an offer on Third Watch. Do you want to write drama or comedy? And we just played it in the room. We were like, well, clearly we want to write drama if that's really, if we're getting an offer. We want to write who's ever hiring us. And so I really wanted to write about life and death stakes. And I thought you could still be humorous in drama as well, but I wanted to write about life and death. And the writing to me was not that it's richer. Story was richer, characters were richer in drama, and to be able to get mentored by John Wells. I mean, she wanted up going back to comedy, but I wound up staying there for 9 seasons between the 2 shows. But that's like 100, that's a ton of mentoring. It's like you wrote for everyone from Stanley Tucci to Forrest Whitaker. You wrote for everyone. You just had a great opportunity. So it really was this desire to write about life and death stakes, and then this amazing opportunity to get mentored by a huge writer who was John Wells.
I think we have run out of time. It's 8:30, and we have had an amazing time listening to your conversation, and just really, really happy you guys could show up today. And
Thank you, Dwayne. Thanks for.
Yeah, thank you.
really, really great. We are so proud of your careers and the future and the next thing you're going to do. Maybe it's another genre you may write in, completely different than this one. So, but thank you so much. And
Fantastic. Great seeing you both. Great seeing you, Shawn.
see
Thank
soon.
you, Janine. Pleasure to get to know you during all this.
Yes, it was great.
See you later, Janine.
Thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thank you, guys.